In 1938, the world stood at a fragile and uncertain point in history. Europe was inching closer to a conflict that would soon engulf the entire globe. Political tensions were rising, alliances were shifting, and technological development was accelerating unevenly across different nations. Communication at that time was still fundamentally mechanical. Long-distance conversations depended on physical telephone lines, manual switchboards, and human operators who physically connected calls by plugging and unplugging cables. There was no digital transmission, no computer networks, and no electronic data processing as we understand it today. Every sound that traveled through a phone line was analog in nature. Electrical signals moved through copper wires, and any distortion could usually be explained by physical interference, line degradation, or operator error. It is within this highly controlled but still imperfect technological environment that one of the most unusual and debated communication reports of the era is said to have occurred. The case is often referred to in alternative research circles as an anomalous communication incident, allegedly taking place in 1938 at an industrial facility in Germany. However, it is important to state from the beginning that there are no officially verified primary documents confirming this event in public historical archives. What we do have are later accounts, fragmented reports, and indirect references compiled decades after the fact. This lack of direct documentation is one of the key reasons the case remains controversial and unverified within mainstream historical research. According to these accounts, the incident began during what was described as a routine night shift at a communication or industrial control facility. These types of facilities relied heavily on telephone switchboards, where operators manually connected incoming and outgoing calls. Under normal circumstances, communication failures were common and well understood. Static noise, cross-line interference, and signal distortion were everyday occurrences. Operators were trained to recognize and correct these issues quickly. However, the reported event did not match these familiar patterns. One of the operators allegedly noticed an unusual type of interference on a live telephone line. Instead of random static, the sound appeared to have structure. It was described as if the noise itself contained rhythm or repetition, something that stood out from the background electrical interference typical of the time. At first, it was treated as a technical fault. The operator attempted to re-establish the connection, assuming it was a standard line malfunction. But then, something unexpected occurred. A voice was reportedly heard through the line. The description of this voice varies slightly across different retellings, but certain characteristics remain consistent. It was not clear or stable. It was fragmented, distorted, and difficult to interpret. However, it was distinct enough to be recognized as intentional speech rather than random noise. The operators present reportedly became aware that this was not a normal transmission. Despite the distortion, parts of the message were allegedly understood. One of the clearest references was to the year 1945. At the time, this date would not have carried any immediate significance to the operators, beyond being a point in the distant future. However, from a modern historical perspective, 1945 is a highly significant year, marking the end of the Second World War and major geopolitical transformation worldwide. This retrospective significance is one of the reasons the case gained attention many years later, as people began re-examining historical coincidences through the lens of later events. Another element attributed to the message was a reference to something described simply as the machine. No further clarification was reportedly given. The term is extremely vague, and from a technical standpoint, it could refer to any number of industrial or experimental systems that might have existed or been in development at the time. After the alleged transmission ended, the line reportedly went silent. What followed, according to the accounts, was an internal attempt to trace the origin of the call. In the telephone systems of the 1930s, tracing a call was a physical process. Connections could be followed through switchboard logs and cable routing. In principle, every call had a definable path through the network. However, in this case, investigators allegedly found no identifiable source. There was no matching incoming line, no registered external connection, no traceable origin within the system's physical infrastructure. This absence of origin is one of the most frequently cited anomalies in the story. In a fully analog system, complete lack of traceability would be highly unusual, though not necessarily impossible, if records were incomplete or disrupted. From a historical and technical standpoint, it is also important to consider the limitations of the era. Communication infrastructure in the late 1930s, especially in industrial or rapidly expanding regions, was not always consistently documented. Wartime preparations and industrial secrecy could also contribute to gaps in record keeping. Because of this, some researchers propose alternative explanations that do not involve any extraordinary phenomena. One possibility is that the event was the result of complex signal interference, potentially involving overlapping radio frequencies or misrouted telephone signals. Early radio systems were capable of producing unpredictable interference patterns that, under rare conditions, could be misinterpreted as structured audio. Another possibility is human error in documentation or retrospective distortion of memory. In historical research, especially when dealing with incomplete archives, it is not uncommon for isolated technical incidents to be later reinterpreted as something more unusual than originally recorded. There is also the broader historical context of 1938 to consider. Europe was in a state of increasing militarization and technological experimentation. Communication systems were evolving rapidly, and various forms of radio and signal research were being conducted, sometimes under limited public transparency. This environment naturally creates uncertainty when trying to reconstruct isolated incidents from fragmented historical memory. Over time, the alleged 1938 communication incident began to appear in niche discussions, compilations of unexplained technical events, and speculative historical analyses. However, it has never been validated through official documentation or confirmed archival evidence. Despite this, the story persists, largely because it contains a combination of elements that are inherently compelling. A structured message, a reference to a specific future year, and the absence of a clear technical origin. From a psychological perspective, these elements are enough to generate long-lasting curiosity, even without verifiable evidence. Historians and engineers generally approach such accounts with caution. The most accepted interpretation remains that if any event occurred at all, it was likely the result of misunderstood technical interference or incomplete documentation rather than any form of temporal communication. Telephone systems of the era were far from perfect. They were vulnerable to cross-line interference, electromagnetic disturbances, mechanical switching errors, and human miscommunication. Any of these factors, alone or combined, could produce unusual audio effects. Additionally, the passage of time often amplifies ambiguity. Events that were once minor technical anomalies can become significantly more mysterious when original witnesses are no longer available and documentation is incomplete or lost. This is one of the reasons cases like this continue to circulate in modern discussions of historical mysteries. Not because they are confirmed anomalies, but because they exist in a space where full verification is no longer possible. The so-called 1938 communication incident remains unproven, undocumented in official archives, and scientifically unverified. Yet it continues to be referenced as an example of how gaps in historical records can evolve into narratives that feel larger than their original context. Ultimately, what remains is not evidence of time communication, but a fragment of historical uncertainty. A story shaped by incomplete records, retrospective interpretation, and the human tendency to search for meaning in isolated and unexplained events. And perhaps that is what makes it persist. Not the confirmation of something impossible,